Okay, so this is my fan rebooking for the Goldberg angle. Okay, if I think this is probably going to be the first one I'm going to do of these because this one will be fairly short. It'll be easier on me because I don't need to look up rosters and plan out all sorts of different storylines and things. This is a pretty simple, how would I do it and how would I try to do it better than them. Because I will make it no secret that I do not like Goldberg. I never will. In all honesty, I would rather, in retrospect, obviously at the time I was less, at the time I wasn't as interested in the back room stuff involved in pro wrestling. Since then, you can call me a smark if you want to, but really it's just that I enjoy pro wrestling to the point that I like to know more about it. For me, knowing more about something does not ruin it. It makes it more enjoyable in some ways. In different ways. And I've always been a fan of what they do in the ring more than the storylines and stuff, but I'm not oblivious to those. And really, maybe it's just a personal thing, but for something like pro wrestling where there is a performance art, theatrical aspect to it, I want the people involved to care. Nothing irritates me more when I see a movie, especially if it didn't do very well, that, is based off a book or comic books or, anything where there is an established source material, and then you find out that one of the actors, or in the case of like Alice in Wonderland, the movie I didn't have a real problem with, but the fact, what I'm talking about here is Tim Burton actually said afterwards, or even before it came out, that he never liked Alice in Wonderland. So it's like, well, motherfucker, yes, I do cuss, but motherfucker, why in the hell did you take the movie if you don't like the source material? If all he was wanting to do, if he loved the source material and just wanted to do an interesting Tim Burton take on the whole thing, that's fine, but to do something that you don't care about and even don't like, maybe he does, maybe his feeling towards it was more apathetic, but still. And the fact of the matter is that if you listen to interviews, anybody that talks about Goldberg will say that he did not give a fuck about pro wrestling. He came from football and saw pro wrestling as a downgrade. It was something he was doing to make money because he had gotten hurt and couldn't do football anymore. So for him, it was just a fucking paycheck. He did not care. So I would rather have seen it on Arquette, honestly, because Arquette, at least at the time, was a real fan of pro wrestling. He loved pro wrestling. Maybe he still does, I don't know, but at the time he did. And I would rather see the belt, even an actor, at least he's an actor that fucking cares. He enjoys pro wrestling, he loves pro wrestling, and he understands it, and he cares about it. Whereas Bill Goldberg has the look, but couldn't give a flying fuck. And for me, caring about what you're doing matters more than having a particular look. There's tons of the greatest pro wrestlers in history. You go back and look. Ric Flair, built dude, but never looked like a fucking bodybuilder. The Andersons, the whole Four Horsemen, all the old school guys, none of them really looked like bodybuilders. There were a few that did, and that was one of the things that helped them stand out and be different. But most of the guys were just guys. They were very skilled. They were bigger than most people, tougher than most people, but they didn't look like they spent 30 hours a week at a gym or something. And the point is that they didn't have the look, the modern idea of what a pro wrestler should look like, which is more like a porn star or something, or, romance novel model than just a pro wrestler or what, and I don't have a problem with guys being clean, good looking and, cut and built, and the workout and stuff. The steroids, I think, is always going to be a problem in the business, but, I don't know jack shit about steroids and all that shit, so I'm not going to go there, really. It's just the point is that they cared. They didn't have to have they didn't have to look like bodybuilders or magazine models underwear models or something because they cared. They made the audience care. And, and that's really what I don't like about Goldberg, in addition to his other more obvious qualities. The way they booked the whole thing with basically was just him going out no selling for a minute or two and then squashing them. And I've never liked squash matches. I grew up watching pro wrestling in the 90s and late 90s with the Attitude Era and WCW. I wasn't around to see the age when basically on TV all you had was squash matches and then one big match, maybe all the big matches between the known guys were at the house shows. I didn't see that era of pro wrestling at all. But that's why my favorite brand, once I found them, unfortunately I didn't find ECW, so I'm talking about ECW. I didn't find them until right before they went under, unfortunately for me, because that's my taste, really. I kind of like the chaos. I am always going to be a bigger fan of what they do in the ring than the storylines. Which is not to say that they're not both valuable. I do not agree. I don't care about, even if I'm talking about somebody who's been in the business a long time, I think things have changed, and I don't think that you should devalue the fact that different people have different tastes. Because to say that people like me are not real pro wrestling fans or do not have a valid point of view just because we like to see, we like the matches more than the storylines that lead up to the matches, to say we don't have a valid opinion is bullshit. Because, I don't say that the people who want the soap opera stuff don't have a valid opinion. I don't see why you can't have both. Why can't you have the hot storyline that gets the people that are into that stuff buzzed up and the great match in the ring? Which is why I don't like Bill Goldberg and I want to rebook his angle. That's the point of this video. So, I think I've rambled on enough about background and views and things as a fan of this. And again, I've never been in the pro wrestling business. I'm not saying that it's obvious that I'm not trying to say I'm a genius and I'm going to do better than the guys who were in it for years. It's just that from a fan point of view, I didn't like Goldberg at the time. In retrospect, I've disliked him more and more the more that I've changed my, refined my taste in pro wrestling to being more interested in the ring action than the storylines, and definitely just the fact that he was so fucking sloppy. And I've never liked, no-sell squash matches, and he was sloppy. I got into this argument, I mentioned this in another video that I'll have up about rebooking the Invasion, but I got into this argument here on YouTube with a guy over who was worse, Sandman or Goldberg. And basically he was coming at it from the point of view that Sandman never made a whole lot of money, and Goldberg did. So that automatically makes Goldberg the better pro wrestler. You see, to me, the thing about it is, and the main reason why I'm doing this, is that Goldberg had nothing to do with his own success. He brought kind of that intensity and a look to it, but that was it. He didn't do much of anything. He didn't impress anybody in the ring, and everything else about him was manufactured. And I cannot stand that sort of thing. It's like, how can you really call yourself a success if it was entirely manufactured by other people? You didn't have anything to do with it. So, no, Goldberg was not a good pro wrestler, and he did not make them a lot of money. He was just the face that they stuck into that role that they used to make themselves a lot of money. Although, if you actually watch people talking about WCW who were there, they weren't making any money at all off of anything they were doing. They were losing money from the very beginning. But that's not for me to talk about. I wasn't there. So this is just from my point of view as a fan of pro wrestling and a fan of, pretty much the whole thing, the whole process of it. How would I have done the Goldberg angle? It's not the first time it was done. In fact, it's probably one of the most classic pro wrestling angles of all time, only they did it kind of in reverse, which is usually when you build up a guy to be a monster that's squashing everybody, it's the bad guy, the heel. In this case, they did it with, in so much as Goldberg was a baby face, they did it with the baby face. He never really had any qualities other than what they gave him with the win streak and whatnot that actually gave him any personality at all. So, who would I want to do that angle with? Well, I want to please as many people as possible, and I already know that we're going to do this angle with the win streak. So, how do I want to get people really engaged in this even better than they were with Goldberg? Goldberg, it was kind of the whole that he's a monster and who could possibly beat this win streak. The problem is that you're building a straw man here. Eventually somebody has to beat him. And to me, my point of view, why doing it the way they did hurts their entire roster, basically, is because in order to build up this huge win streak, it was over 100, I think, by the time he lost, he has to go up against the roster more than once. You know, as huge as WCW's roster was, there would have been some overlap. He would have had to face at least a few of them several times, or at least twice. And also, just what impact does the streak actually have? Yes, there was a buzz created around the win streak, but what value did it have long term? Is building up, a legacy for this character that's just coming out of nowhere, having this win streak, and then runs into a brick wall. I mean, where do you go? I think they call this hot shotting because it's really something that can only work once, and it doesn't really help you in the long term. It's something that helps you right then, and then you fuck yourself over long term with it. Because, again, the squash matches, how does that help you? Or him? If he just goes out and beats everybody in a squash, well, what value does that give the win streak? What do those wins mean? He just beat everybody. And then, how does that give your roster any value? How can you have them have any believable, matches where anybody seems like a believable competitor after you've had this one guy roll over your whole roster like they're nothing? Going to the man. Okay, I didn't finish what I was talking about with him and Sandman. I'm sorry. I got sidetracked into what I'm supposed to be talking about instead of the side stuff. So I had gotten into this argument with a guy about who is the worst pro wrestler, Sandman or Goldberg. And I'll try to wrap this part up real quick. And again, his point was just that Goldberg had made all this money for them, which he actually had, and he didn't have anything to do with the success he did have. So, really what it comes down to is who's the better performer. Well, Sandman has always been kind of, he's either a love him or hate him kind of a pro wrestler. But you know what? If you've bought that he's as out of control and sloppy and crazy as he looks, if you've bought into that, then you're a mark for Sandman. Because here's the thing. Of all the years Sandman's been doing this, he's never seriously hurt anybody that I know about. He's never crippled anybody. He's never maimed anybody. He might have, caused a few minor injuries over the years, just like any other pro wrestler would, but he's never seriously hurt anyone as far as I know. Goldberg put Bret Hart out of pro wrestling with the simplest move ever, a kick. He kicked him in the fucking head. Sandman has been in barbed wire matches. He's been in all that crazy hardcore shit. Never put out, seriously injured a single person. So tell me who really is the most sloppy here. No, you see, because Sandman, even though he is a drunk and a drug addict, just like a lot of pro wrestlers end up being, what he does out in the ring, he's not as out of control and sloppy as he looks. That's his character. So, again, if you've fallen for his character, you're the mark for Sandman, and I respect him greatly for his ability to make people believe that he's as incapable as he looks. When, his whole thing is just this guy that just is, just does shit. That's his character. It's supposed to look like that. Goldberg is just a screw-up. in that regard. So performance-wise, Sandman leaps and bounds and a skip, a jump, and a landscape away from Goldberg in terms of performance. And as for money draw, I don't know for certain, but it's one of those things that retrospectively, having heard about WCW, now I wasn't there so I can't say this for sure, but I have always heard from guys that were there watching interviews and stuff that WCW never made money. It always lost money because their booking was horrible at the shows, their pay-per-view rates were good, but nowhere near good enough to cover the massive amount of money going out to the top guys in the roster, and even the lower guys. Because I think with WCW, even the undercard guys were making a mint. There's a reason they called it the cash machine. Or the piggy bank, whatever the fuck it was, they called it. So I don't know that WCW ever made money, which means Goldberg may never have made a single dime for any pro wrestling promotion ever. He may have made some money in Japan. I don't know what he did while he was there. So it is not necessarily unreasonable to say that in terms of just being a pro wrestler in the length of the careers involved here, it's not unreasonable to think that perhaps Sandman has actually made more money for people than Goldberg ever did. I don't know for certain, but it is a possibility. Back on topic with Goldberg. And so I've already made it very clear why I would not want to use someone like Goldberg. Who would I want to use with this? But, where was I actually in this? Oh yeah, why it's so bad for your roster and him in general. I think I was already more or less covered that, but I'll recap just in case. Him squashing guys makes it so that the streak means nothing. He didn't really, he never has to look like he's working for anything, so the streak, it doesn't mean anything. If you look at a win streak in another professional, like the basketball, I don't watch professional sports, team sports, I've never, it's never appealed to me. I'll watch, if I can actually go and watch it, it's okay, but I don't watch it on TV. Sometimes I watch Olympics and stuff like that, but if you're a fan of basketball or football, anything where there is a tournament structure or some sort of a round robin thing where it leads up to a big face-off at like the Super Bowl or March Madness with the college basketball and all that stuff, what's more appealing to you? What if you don't necessarily have a team of your own and you actually like to watch the whole thing, you're a fan of the whole thing, what do you really get behind? Well, you're going to get behind a win streak, sure, but you're going to get behind a win streak that they have to work for a lot better. It's going to be more memorable, it's going to reflect better on them in the long term, because you feel like they could have lost at any time, but they didn't. And that makes it more dramatic. Because if they just squash everybody in their bouts, their matches, their games, however you want to rephrase that, then clearly you can make the argument, well, how good could they actually be, or how good are they actually? That could have just been that they had a streak of really weak teams they went against. That doesn't mean anything. So, for a streak to mean something long term, it's better sense for them the person that's getting this win streak in pro wrestling to go up against people that could have beat them and actually have good matches where you feel like they could have lost. And that also makes it to where your roster never looks weaker because of this win streak, because they could have won. They just didn't, because there's something about this guy. He's hot. He's got the skills right now. He's got the momentum coming behind him right now. He's on a streak. And it also makes it okay when he loses, because you never feel like he's impossible to beat, just that he's got something going right now, and you're not going to beat him right now. After a while, that's the feeling you get. But when he finally does beat, you're disappointed, but you make it believable and it makes it okay. Whereas Goldberg, they had just built up this incredible monster and they hadn't built anybody else up to the same level to make it feel okay when he gets beat. It was just a fucking screw job, which was all they knew how to do at the time, which was just a flat-out bullshit storyline. So who would I do this angle with? Who is my Goldberg instead of Goldberg? Give me somebody like Taz. Not necessarily Taz himself. He would have been too well-known at the time. Just through, even regionally, I don't want a known guy. I want somebody who's fresh out of one of the indies off on the West Coast or someplace where there's not a huge audience. ECW may not have ever been a big three company that some people think it was, but it was widespread enough that I don't want anybody from ECW. I want somebody like Taz or Benoit or Chris Jericho. In fact, out of anybody that I could have had, somebody a lot like Chris Jericho, it would have been my pick, because I want somebody who can talk, who can put on great matches in the ring, who has a good look, the total thread, the total package. Somebody who's paid his dues out in the indies and actually worked with guys. So kind of a Raven or a Chris Jericho type of person. A pro wrestler. Someone who's had time to learn, to build up their own character, to find the character within themselves, their own personality, to find out who they're going to be. Somebody who already knows what the fuck they're doing, so I don't have to have them trained. And can just jump right into this. So once I have my guy, and I don't actually have a name, which irritates me, I could probably go through and look at indie names, but that's really not important, because who the person is not as important to this angle as the angle itself, obviously. This is just how I would do it differently. So once I have my indie guy that knows what he's doing, has his character developed, has a personality, we do basically the exact same thing they did with Goldberg, only, again, like I was just saying, you don't have squash matches. You give him underdog wins, basically, because that's how you want this to feel. This is a guy who is coming up through the ranks with this win streak. Nobody knows who he is. He's a brand new face to WCW and pro wrestling in general. K-Fab, I guess, is how they would term it. I don't know if that's a correct usage there. But, he before this, he was just off in an indie somewhere, so nobody knows who he is. So we have this brand new guy coming up through the ranks with this win streak. And they did do one thing right with Goldberg, in that they didn't start drawing attention to it until it was a legitimately long win streak. It wasn't, it was just like all of a sudden somebody kind of notices that this guy hasn't lost yet. And that was a good way to do it. So that's kind of how I would do it too. It's just that I'm protecting the rest of my roster, and I'm building this up so that there's more credibility, more believability, which is important for suspension of disbelief, and more emotion. Because this is an underdog we're talking about here. He is winning, but always by a small margin. He's barely winning, but he is winning. And over time, as he gets more confidence, the wins are going to become a little less marginal. But it's always going to make you feel, when you're watching his matches, that he could lose. We don't want a monster. We want the little guy who could. Because that's what's going to get the audience into it. Because what we want is for him to go through and win a title. The world title. Even though everything on paper says he can't. Because that is the story that people want to see. That's the story people are used to. It's the Rudy story. It's, The Mighty Ducks. Pick any sports movie ever made about kids, sports movies, or even adult sports films. Angels in the Outfield. Pick any of them. It's all the same story. You have a screw-up team that hasn't won ever, that manages Major League, I'm sorry, I keep remembering movies now. But they come up through the ranks and win the fucking title. The pennant, whatever. So, in fact, if you wanted to, you could do this whole thing with somebody who was already in WCW at the time, but was just a perpetual fuck-up. You could bring him in as a perpetual fuck-up, get people used to him being a perpetual fuck-up who never wins, and then suddenly have him start winning, and keep winning, and keep winning, and keep winning. That actually might be an even better way to do the angle, but, that's something you'd have to talk out at the time, and really decide if you want to bring in the new guy that becomes the unbeatable underdog who's, becomes the wonder kid, or do you start off with somebody who's established as a loser and then build them up to be the big winner. And really, there's a lot of, good points to both ways of doing it. I'd kind of like the idea of starting with a loser and building him up to become a winner, because that is the story that people know, that they like to watch, and would have the most emotional impact, is because then you get to feel the guy blossoming, basically, because that's what it's all about. It's about this person, or in the case of the movies, a team that are losers and suddenly become winners. It's the American dream. It's, the rags to riches story that everybody loves because they want to be that guy. And basically, I'm sorry about all the extraneous rambling, but, it all factors into what I'm talking about. But that's how I would do that angle. I would either bring in somebody unknown and build them up like they did, but do it in a way that makes it more of an underdog story, or I would actually make it just a flat-out rags to riches underdog story, which would probably be my preference, ultimately. Because, like I was just saying, that's the one that is going to get the most people cheering. And eventually, yeah, he's going to lose the title. That's inevitable. But, you haven't built up some insane monster that's just impossible to beat so that it makes it unbelievable when he is. So, yeah, I think that's definitely how I would do that story. Let me know what your thoughts are. Preferably without being an asshole about it. But if you feel like trolling me or being a jerk, whatever, fine, I can take it, bring it on. If you have positive comments, by all means, please leave those. Share this with your pro wrestling fans and the forums and whatnot, that some people might find this interesting. Something to talk about, who would they have wanted to use, how would they have wanted to do it, perhaps, what changes to my idea would they want to make, argue with me over my point of view about certain people, all that sort of stuff. That's all good. Subscribe if you enjoy this sort of stuff. I'll be doing more of it, as well as I have music and scary stories are all things that I'm interested in and put up here, including interesting discussion ideas and sometimes rants about things that piss me off. If you're brand new to my channel, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.